The Apocryphon of John, discovered in 1945 in the Nag Hammadi Library, contains a meditation technique so precise that the Church spent 11 centuries trying to erase every copy, not because it was heretical, because it worked. And when a practice gives you direct access to source consciousness without needing priests, sacraments, or institutional approval, it cannot coexist with a system built on controlling that access. What you're about to learn is not metaphor, not philosophy. It's a literal activation sequence using 7 specific words in 7 ancient languages that create measurable shifts in brainwave patterns, documented in studies at the University of Pennsylvania's Center for Spirituality and the Mind. The Archons fear this because once you establish resonance with what the Gnostics called the monad, their frequency manipulation stops working. You can verify this yourself within 20 minutes of starting the practice. And if you're watching this video, if you made it past the algorithm that tries to bury content like this under wellness influencers and meditation apps, you're ready for direct contact with the source that exists before language, before separation, before every religious system that tried to claim it as property. In the next 2 hours, you will receive the complete historical context, the precise pronunciation, the neurological framework, and the step-by-step practice that Gnostic initiates used to anchor consciousness in what they called monad frequency before attempting any other spiritual work. You'll learn why these 7 specific words survived when thousands of other sacred terms were lost. You'll understand the relationship between sound, frequency, and consciousness that modern neuroscience is only beginning to validate. And you'll have a 30-day roadmap that takes you from basic activation to sustained recognition of source consciousness, with clear markers so you can measure your own progress without relying on anyone's authority, including mine. The 7 words are Ehyeh in Hebrew, Allah in Aramaic, Monos in Greek, Brahman in Sanskrit, Pimonad in Coptic, Atum in Egyptian, and An in Sumerian. These are not 7 names for 7 different deities. They are 7 phonetic keys to the same frequency, preserved across cultures that had no contact with each other, pointing to a phenomenon that exists independent of any single tradition. And when you speak all 7 in sequence, something happens that I'm going to describe precisely, so you know what to expect, what to ignore as distraction, and what indicates you've made actual contact versus experiencing placebo or wishful thinking. The monad has no name because it exists before the linguistic framework that makes naming necessary. You only name things that are distinct from other things. But the monad is totality, the infinite consciousness from which everything emanates and to which everything returns. The source that has no opposite, no complement, no external reference point. Every mystical tradition that went deep enough encountered this same reality and created sounds to point toward it using whatever phonetic tools their language provided. The Hebrew mystics who preserved the Kabbalah, the Aramaic Christians who maintained Jesus' original teachings before the Roman canonization, the Greek Gnostics who wrote the texts discovered at Nag Hammadi, the Vedic seers who composed the Upanishads, the Egyptian initiates in the mystery schools at Heliopolis, the Coptic communities who hid their manuscripts in clay jars, and the Sumerian priests whose cuneiform tablets predate every Abrahamic religion by 2,000 years. All pointing to the same source, all using sound as the activation mechanism. The reason this matters, the reason this is not just comparative linguistics or academic curiosity, is because sound is frequency, and frequency affects consciousness in ways that modern neuroscience can now measure, but ancient practitioners understood empirically through direct experience. When you speak certain phonemes with specific intention, while maintaining awareness of the resonance in your body, you create what researchers at the University of California's Center for Mind and Brain call neural entrainment. Your brainwave patterns synchronize with the frequency of the sound. And if that sound was designed by people who spent lifetimes mapping the relationship between phonetic resonance and states of consciousness, it functions as a key, not metaphorically, literally, a key that opens access to frequencies normally obscured by the constant mental noise the archons use to keep awareness trapped in survival mode, social comparison, and fear-based thinking. The Gnostics who preserved these words did not teach them casually. They were initiatory, reserved for those who had demonstrated they could handle direct contact with source frequency without being destroyed by it. And when I say destroyed, I mean the complete dissolution of the ego structure that maintains your sense of being a separate individual in a hostile universe. Because the monad is infinite, and when finite consciousness touches the infinite without preparation, without the proper framework, without understanding what is about to happen, it does not result in enlightenment. It results in psychological crisis, depersonalization, the total collapse of every identity you built to navigate social reality. This is why the mystery schools had initiation sequences that could take years. This is why the rabbis restricted Kabbalistic study to married men over 40. This is why the Vedic tradition required guru lineages and ashram training before attempting certain practices, not because they were gatekeeping for power, because the technology is real, and using it without preparation is like giving someone LSD without explaining what's about to happen to their sense of self. But we're not in the ancient world anymore. You have access to information those initiates never had. You understand psychology. You know about neuroplasticity, about set and setting, about the difference between pathological dissociation and temporary ego dissolution during practice. You can read the Nag Hammadi texts yourself, instead of relying on priests to interpret them. You can compare the Apocryphon of John with the Bhagavad Gita with the Sefer Yetzirah and see the patterns yourself. And most importantly, you can approach this practice with clear intention, realistic expectations, and the ability to integrate whatever experiences arise without needing to create a religious identity around them. The historical origin point for understanding the monad as a specific concept, not just a vague notion of unity, is the Neoplatonist philosopher Plotinus, writing in the 3rd century CE in Alexandria. But Plotinus was systematizing ideas that were already ancient by his time, drawing from Plato, from Pythagoras, from Egyptian mystery schools, and from what scholars now believe was contact with Gnostic communities in Egypt before the Roman persecution scattered them. Plotinus described the monad as the one, from which all multiplicity emanates through a process he called emanation, not creation. This distinction is critical. Creation implies separation, a creator and a creation, subject and object. Emanation implies continuation. Light emanating from the sun is not separate from the sun. It is the sun extending itself through space. The monad emanating reality is not creating something external to itself. It is expressing itself as multiplicity while remaining fundamentally one. The Enneads, Plotinus's collected writings preserved by his student Porphyry, describe a meditation practice designed to reverse the process of emanation, to trace consciousness back from the experience of being a separate individual through the layers of mental activity, through the archetypal forms Plato called the forms, back to the nous or divine intellect, and finally to the monad itself. Plotinus called this practice henosis, union with the One, and he claimed to have achieved it 4 times in his life, describing it as a state where there was no distinction between myself and the One, but I was the One. This is not mystical poetry. This is phenomenological description, the experience of touching a state of consciousness, where the sense of being a bounded separate self temporarily dissolves, and what remains is pure awareness without subject-object division. The Gnostic texts discovered at Nag Hammadi in 1945 use different language but describe the same reality. The Apocryphon of John, written sometime in the 2nd century CE, possibly earlier, presents a cosmology where the monad exists as the ultimate source, invisible, ineffable, existing before the aeons that form the pleroma, the fullness of divine reality. The text describes the monad as a monarchy with nothing above it, not in the political sense, but in the metaphysical sense of absolute unity without division, and then it provides a series of names, or more accurately sounds, that serve as invocations to establish recognition with the monad before attempting to navigate the complex Gnostic cosmology of aeons, archons, and the material world. The reason the Church destroyed these texts, the reason the Theodosian Code in 381 CE and subsequent imperial edicts targeted Gnostic communities with systematic violence, was not theological disagreement, it was threat assessment, a teaching that gives direct access to source consciousness without requiring baptism, communion, confession, or ecclesiastical authority, cannot coexist with an institution claiming to be the only valid mediator between humanity and the divine. The Church could tolerate philosophical debate. It could tolerate theological speculation. It could not tolerate a practice that made priests unnecessary. And so every Gnostic text that contained these activation techniques was ordered destroyed. Every community that preserved them was scattered. Every teacher who transmitted them was executed or forced underground. But fragments survived. Hidden in prayers the Church thought were harmless because they didn't understand the original context. Embedded in mystical texts, the rabbis tried to keep secret within Jewish communities. Preserved in Sanskrit mantras, the yogis transmitted teacher to student across thousands of years, protected by the fact that Islamic and Christian conquest didn't penetrate India with the same totalizing force. Carved into temple walls in Egypt and Mesopotamia that predated every Abrahamic religion, waiting to be excavated by archaeologists who had no idea what they were looking at. And here's what modern scholarship has revealed that the ancient practitioners already knew. These 7 words, emerging from cultures separated by thousands of miles and hundreds of years, contain nearly identical phonetic structures when you account for the linguistic drift between language families, the Hebrew Ehyeh, the Aramaic Alaha, the Greek Monos, the Sanskrit Brahman, the Coptic Pimonad, the Egyptian Atum, and the Sumerian and all share a nasal resonance, a vowel elongation, and a phonetic simplicity that suggests they were not intellectually constructed but empirically discovered, sound shapes that produce specific effects on consciousness when vocalized with attention. Dr. Andrew Newberg at the University of Pennsylvania has been studying the neurology of spiritual practices since the 1990s. His SPECT scan research on Tibetan Buddhist monks during meditation, Franciscan nuns during prayer, and Pentecostal practitioners during glossolalia shows consistent patterns. When people engage in sustained vocal practices, especially those involving repetitive sounds with nasal resonance and vowel elongation, blood flow increases in the prefrontal cortex and decreases in the parietal lobe. The parietal lobe is responsible for spatial orientation, for maintaining the sense of where your body ends and the external world begins. When activity in that region decreases, practitioners report experiences of boundary dissolution, of merging with something larger than the individual self, of touching what they describe as infinite consciousness or union with the divine. This is not proof that God exists. This is proof that certain practices reliably produce neurological states that practitioners across cultures interpret as contact with ultimate reality. The common misconception about mystical practice is that it's about believing in something, having faith in a doctrine or a deity. The reality, which the Gnostics understood and which gets lost when religion becomes institutionalized, is that mystical practice is about direct experience. It's phenomenology, not theology. You're not trying to believe in the monad, you're trying to recognize it as the ground of your own awareness. And that recognition is not conceptual, it's perceptual. It's the shift that happens when you stop identifying with the content of consciousness, with thoughts and emotions and sensations, and recognize yourself as the awareness in which all that content appears. The reason these practices were forgotten, or more accurately suppressed, is because they threaten every power structure built on controlling access to the sacred. Religion, when it functions as institutional control, needs you to believe that the divine is distant, that you are fundamentally separate from source consciousness, and that you need their mediation to bridge that gap. Sin doctrines, karma systems, ritual requirements, dietary restrictions, gender hierarchies, all designed to maintain the structure where they have access to the sacred and you don't. But if you can establish direct recognition of source consciousness yourself, if you can verify through your own experience that awareness is not produced by your brain but is the ground in which your brain activity appears, then you don't need their permission anymore. You don't need their forgiveness, their blessings, their sacraments. You have direct contact, and that makes you ungovernable. Now we're going to go deep into each of the 7 words, not as linguistic analysis but as activation codes. I'm going to give you the historical context, the precise pronunciation, the resonance location in your body, and the specific intention you hold while vocalizing each one. This is not about getting it perfect. The ancient practitioners didn't have audio recordings, they had oral transmission, and oral transmission always involves variation. What matters is not perfect phonetic accuracy, but the intention you bring and the attention you maintain. Sound is a carrier wave. Intention and attention determine what that wave carries. The first word is Ihyeh from Hebrew, appearing in Exodus 3:14, when Moses asks the voice from the burning bush to identify itself. The English translation renders this as I am that I am, which completely obscures the original meaning. Ehyeh is the first person singular imperfect form of the verb haya, meaning to be or to exist. But in Hebrew, the imperfect tense doesn't indicate past, present, or future. It indicates incomplete, ongoing, continuous action. Ehyeh is not I am. It's I am being, I am becoming, I am existing, all simultaneously. It's the eternal present continuous, the consciousness that exists without beginning or end, without past or future, without the temporal framework that creates the experience of separation from source. The Kabbalistic tradition, especially the text Sefer Yetzirah composed sometime between the 3rd and 6th centuries CE, uses Ehyeh as the divine name associated with Keter, the first Sephirah on the Tree of Life, representing the initial point of emanation from Ein Sof, the infinite. But Keter is not God in the theistic sense. It's the first movement of consciousness recognizing itself, the first distinction between awareness and what awareness is aware of. And Ehyeh is the sound of that recognition, not something you say to God, something you say as God, as the monad recognizing itself through the temporary vehicle of your individual awareness. The pronunciation is Ehyeh, with the emphasis on the first syllable. The S sound is open, relaxed, like the beginning of egg. The Y sound ends with a slight aspirated breath, almost like a sigh. When you vocalize this, the resonance should be in your chest, in the heart center, not in your throat or your head. The practice is to say it 3 times slowly, with full attention on the sound vibrating in your body. Ehyeh. Pause, Ehyeh, pause, Ehyeh. And between each vocalization, notice what happens to your sense of self. Not what you think about it, what you directly perceive. Does the boundary between inside and outside feel more fluid? Does the constant narrative in your mind quiet even slightly? Does awareness feel more present, more immediate, less filtered through memory and anticipation? The second word is Aloha from Aramaic, the language Jesus spoke and the language in which his original teachings were transmitted before the Greek Gospels canonized and sanitized them. Aramaic was the common language of the Near East from about 600 BCE to 600 CE, and the Aramaic Christian communities that survived in Syria, Iraq and Iran preserve traditions that are radically different from Roman Catholicism or Eastern Orthodoxy. The Peshitta, the Aramaic version of the New Testament, uses Allah, where the Greek uses Theos and the English uses God. But Allah does not mean God in the sense of a separate external creator deity. It means the sacred presence, the unified field, the breath of life that exists in all things as all things without separation. The root of Allah is related to the Arabic Allah, but the Aramaic carries a different resonance. In Aramaic cosmology, reality is not divided between creator and creation, spirit and matter, sacred and profane. Everything is manifestation of the one sacred presence breathing itself into form. The Aramaic word for prayer, slotha, doesn't mean petition or supplication. It means to set a trap, to create a condition where divine presence can reveal itself. You're not asking an external God for something. You're creating internal conditions where you recognize the sacred that's already present. When Jesus teaches the Lord's Prayer in Aramaic, the opening is Abun de Boashmaya, which the Greek translates as Our Father who art in heaven. But the Aramaic scholar Neil Douglas Klotz translates it more accurately as O breathing life of all, source of the sound that lights the universe. Abun comes from abi, meaning source or generator, and wun, meaning breath or vibration. De Boashmaya doesn't mean heaven as a place. It means the universe of vibration and light. This is not prayer to a distant father figure. This is recognition of source consciousness as the breathing presence that generates reality through vibration and light. Allah is pronounced Allah, with equal emphasis on all three syllables and a strong aspirated H at the end. The sound starts in the belly, rises through the chest, and releases through the mouth with that final breath. The resonance is full body, not localized. When you vocalize Allah 3 times, pay attention to your breath, not controlling it, just noticing it. Notice that you are being breathed. The breath happens on its own. You don't create it. It arises from the autonomic nervous system, from the body's intelligence, from something prior to your individual will. And that breath, that animating presence, is what Allah points toward. The life breathing you right now, which existed before your birth and will continue after your death, which is not yours but is the sacred presence expressing through the temporary form you call yourself. The third word is monas, from Greek, the language of the Neoplatonists and the Gnostic texts. Greek philosophy gave the Mediterranean world its intellectual framework for understanding reality, and when Gnostic teachers wanted to communicate their cosmology to educated audiences in Alexandria, Athens and Rome, they used Greek philosophical terminology. Mona appears in Pythagorean number mysticism as the first principle from which all numbers emanate, in Platonic philosophy as the one from which the forms derive, in Plotinus as the source of all being, and in the Gnostic texts as the ultimate reality before the pleroma, before the aeons, before anything that can be named or conceptualized. The Apocryphon of John describes the monas in negative theology language. It is not something that exists, meaning it doesn't exist as objects exist, with form and limitation. It is not something that can be known, meaning it transcends conceptual knowledge. It is invisible, ineffable, incomprehensible, not because it's hidden, but because it's prior to the categories of visibility, language, and comprehension. And yet the text insists it is possible to know it, not through intellect, but through direct recognition, through what the Gnostics called gnosis, immediate experiential knowledge that bypasses belief and concept. Monas is pronounced monas, with the emphasis on the first syllable. The mo sound has a nasal quality, resonating in the sinuses and the bones of the skull. The nas ending is soft, almost like a whisper. This is a head-resonant sound, different from the chest resonance of Ehye or the full-body resonance of Allah. When you vocalize monas 3 times, The practice is to feel the vibration in your skull, in the space behind your forehead, in the area that corresponds to what Eastern traditions call the third eye or Ajna chakra. Not because there's a literal eye there, but because that location corresponds to the pineal gland and the prefrontal cortex, and vibrating that area with specific sounds appears to affect consciousness in ways practitioners report as expanded awareness, clarity, or what the Greeks called nous, divine intellect. The fourth word is Brahman from Sanskrit, appearing in the Upanishads composed between 800 and 400 BCE in northern India. Brahman is not Brahma, the creator god. Brahman is the ultimate reality, the unchanging, infinite, eternal consciousness that exists as the ground of all being. The Chandogya Upanishad teaches Tat Tvamasi, thou art that. The Brihadaranyaka Upanishad declares, I am Atma Brahma, this self is Brahman. The Mandukya Upanishad identifies Brahman with Aum, the primordial sound from which all other sounds emanate. These are not philosophical propositions, they are descriptions of realization, the direct recognition that what you are at the deepest level, what the Vedic tradition calls Atman or true self, is not separate from Brahman. Not a piece of it or a reflection of it, but identical with it. The reason this is hard to grasp conceptually is because language creates subject-object division. When you say I am Brahman, there's still an I and a Brahman, still two things. But the realization the Upanishads point toward is prior to that division. It's the recognition that awareness itself, the consciousness in which all experience appears, including the thought, I, is not produced by you. You appear in it. Your body, your thoughts, your emotions, your entire sense of individual identity appears in awareness, and that awareness is Brahman, not yours, not localized in your skull. The infinite consciousness that exists as the ground of all manifestation, recognizing itself through the temporary perspective of individual experience. Brahman is pronounced Brahmun, with a rolling gr and the emphasis on the first syllable. The bra sound vibrates in the chest and throat. The mun ending is nasal, resonating in the sinuses. This is a sound that moves, starting in the chest and rising to the head. When you vocalize Brahman 3 times, track the movement of the sound through your body. Notice how it starts deep and rises. That movement from lower to higher, from dense to subtle, mirrors the Vedic understanding of reality as a spectrum from gross matter to subtle consciousness. All of it Brahman expressing at different frequencies. The 5th word is Pimonad, from Coptic, the language the Egyptian Gnostics used when they wrote the Nag Hammadi texts that were hidden in clay jars around 400 CE and discovered in 1945. Coptic is the final form of the ancient Egyptian language, written in Greek letters with some additional characters, and it preserves concepts from pharaonic Egypt that didn't survive in Greek or Latin translation. Pimonad is a compound, pi meaning the as a definite article, and monad from the Greek. The monad, not a monad, as if there could be multiple. The singular, definite, ultimate source from which all emanation flows. The Coptic Gnostic texts, especially the Tripartite Tractate and the Apocryphon of John, use Pimonad in ritual contexts. These were not texts for general reading. They were liturgical, meant to be read aloud or chanted during initiation ceremonies. The practice was to anchor consciousness in monad frequency, before attempting to navigate what the Gnostics mapped as the archonic realms, the layers of reality between source consciousness and material manifestation, where various powers and authorities try to keep souls trapped in ignorance and fear. The Gnostics understood that you don't fight the archons from the level of ego. You transcend them by identifying with what they cannot touch. And Pimonad is the sound that establishes that identification. Pimonad is pronounced Piemonad, with equal emphasis on all 3 syllables. The P is sharp, almost like a whistle. The Mo is nasal, like Monas. The nad ends with a hard stop. This is a percussive sound, rhythmic, creating a staccato vibration rather than a sustained resonance. When you vocalize pimonad 3 times, it should feel like 3 strikes, 3 definitive assertions. Not aggressive, but clear, unambiguous. This is the sound of claiming identity with source, of declaring I am not the roles I play, not the fears that haunt me, not the limitations the world imposed on me. I am the monad recognizing itself. The 6th word is atom, from ancient Egyptian, older than Coptic, older than Greek influence. Atom appears in the pyramid text from the Old Kingdom, around 2400 BCE, making it one of the oldest recorded divine names humanity has preserved. Atom is the self-created one, the God who existed before creation, who spoke himself into being through the power of his own word. The Heliopolitan creation myth describes Atom standing on the primordial mound, the first solid ground to emerge from the waters of none, the chaos that existed before order, and masturbating or sneezing or speaking to create shu and tefnut, air and moisture, the first differentiation from unity into duality. Modern scholarship is uncomfortable with the sexual imagery, but the Egyptian priests who composed these myths were not prudish. They understood creation as a fundamentally erotic act, not in the profane sense, but in the sacred sense of self-pleasuring, self-expression, the divine delighting in its own creative power without needing anything outside itself. Atum is the monad in Egyptian language, the self-aware consciousness that exists before and beyond all creation, that generates reality from its own substance without requiring an external creator or cause. The mystery schools at Heliopolis, at Thebes, at Abydos transmitted the deeper teaching that Atom is not a being you worship, but a principle you activate. The self-created aspect of consciousness. The recognition that you don't need validation from parents, from society, from religious authority to be what you are. Awareness is self-evident. It doesn't need proof. It doesn't need permission. It is. And when the initiates in the temples spoke the name Atum, they were not calling to an external deity. They were activating that self-created principle inside themselves. Atum is pronounced Atum, with the emphasis on the first syllable and a hard T. The R is wide open, like the sound you make when the doctor asks you to say ah. The tum is a soft strike, the tongue hitting the roof of the mouth. This sound resonates in the solar plexus, the area that corresponds to personal power, will, agency. When you vocalize Atom 3 times, place your attention in your belly, in the gut. Not the heart, not the head, the gut. The place where you feel fear and courage, where you know things before you can explain why, where the body's ancient intelligence resides. Atom activates that intelligence, that knowing that exists before and beneath conceptual thought. The 7th word is An, from Sumerian, the oldest written language humanity has ever recovered. The cuneiform tablets from Mesopotamia date back to 3400 BCE, and they contain hymns, prayers, myths, and administrative records that give us a window into how the Sumerians understood reality 5,000 years ago. And is the Sumerian word for sky, for heaven, for the totality, for the infinite expanse that contains all things. But in the deepest Sumerian mysteries, the ones that were not written down, that were transmitted only orally from priest to initiate in the temples at Uruk and Eridu and Nippur, An was understood not as a place but as consciousness itself. The Sumerians did not separate the divine from the cosmos the way later monotheistic religions did. They understood that what you call God, what the Gnostics call the monad, what the Vedic seers call Brahman, is not a being inside reality. It is reality recognizing itself, and is the awareness that pervades all things, that exists in everything as everything, that is not localized in any particular form but expresses through all forms, When the priests invoked An, they were not calling to a sky god. They were recognizing the all-pervading consciousness that the sky represents, the infinite expanse of awareness in which all experience appears. An is pronounced as a single sound, An, with the N held as a long nasal hum. The R opens the mouth wide, the N closes it to a hum that vibrates in the sinuses, the skull, the entire head. This is the most sustained of the 7 sounds, the one you hold longest. When you vocalize them 3 times, each repetition should last for a full breath. Breathe in, then release the sound slowly, letting it vibrate through your entire upper body, feeling it in your bones, in the cavities of your skull, in the space behind your eyes. An is the sound of space itself, of the infinite expanse of consciousness in which all experience arises and dissolves. Now here is the complete practice, the sequence the Gnostic initiates use to anchor consciousness in monad frequency before attempting any other work. You will speak each word 3 times, out loud if possible, silently if circumstances require it. But out loud is better because the vibration in your body is part of the mechanism. This is not intellectual, it's somatic. You're using sound to entrain your nervous system, to shift your brainwave patterns, to create the physiological conditions where recognition becomes possible. Begin by sitting comfortably with your spine relatively straight. Not rigid, just upright enough that your breath can flow freely. Close your eyes or soften your gaze. Take 3 slow, deep breaths to settle your body and quiet your mind. Then begin with Ehyeh. Speak it 3 times, slowly, with full attention on the resonance in your chest. Ehyeh, Ehyeh, Ehyeh. Pause for 3 breaths. Then Alaha, 3 times, feeling the full body resonance and the breath moving through you. Alaheh, Alaheh, Alaheh. Pause for 3 breaths, then Monas 3 times with a vibration in your head. Monas. Monas. Pause. Then Brahman 3 times, tracking the movement from chest to head. Brahman, Brahman, Brahman. Pause. Then Pimonad 3 times, sharp and definitive. Pimonad, Pimonad, Pimonad. Pause. Then Atum 3 times in the solar plexus. Atum, Atum, Atum. Pause. Then An 3 times, sustained and nasal. An, An, An. After you've spoken all 7 words, sit in silence for at least 5 minutes, preferably 10 or 15. This is not waiting for something to happen. This is noticing what is already here. The awareness that witnessed the sounds, that witnesses your thoughts, that witnesses your body breathing, that is present right now reading these words and understanding them. That awareness is not produced by your brain. Your brain appears in it. Your thoughts appear in it. Your entire sense of being a separate individual appears in it. And that awareness, that consciousness in which all experience arises, is what every ancient tradition pointed toward using the words available in their language and culture. The recognition is not dramatic. Most people expecting thunder miss the stillness. What happens is subtle. The constant narrative in your mind, the voice that's always commenting, judging, planning, remembering, that voice quiets. Not permanently, not at first, but for moments. And in those moments, you notice awareness itself. Not what you're aware of. The awareness. The consciousness that is always present, always witnessing, always here, regardless of what appears in it. Thoughts come and go. Emotions come and go. Sensations come and go. But awareness remains. And that awareness does not feel small, localized, bounded. It feels vast, open, infinite, because it is. It's the monad recognizing itself through the temporary lens of your individual experience. This is not belief. You're not being asked to believe anything. This is phenomenology, direct observation of your own experience, and you can verify it yourself. Speak the 7 words according to the sequence I just described. Sit in silence afterward. Notice what you notice, not what you think you should notice, not what you hope to notice, what you actually directly perceive. And if nothing shifts, if awareness feels exactly the same as it always did, that's information too, not failure, information. Maybe the timing isn't right. Maybe your nervous system is too activated to settle. Maybe you're trying too hard. The practice is not a formula where input A produces output B every time. It's an invitation. And sometimes invitations go unanswered, not because the door is closed, but because you knocked when no one was home. The 30-day roadmap starts simple and builds gradually. For the first week, practice the 7-word sequence once per day, preferably in the morning before the day's demands fragment your attention. Don't add anything else. Don't try to meditate for an hour or read Gnostic texts or completely overhaul your life. Just do the practice once per day and notice what happens. Keep a journal if that helps. 1 or 2 sentences about what you observed, not interpretations, observations. The mental chatter quieted for about 30 seconds after the 3rd word. I felt a warmth in my chest during Ehye. Nothing noticeable happened, but I felt more centered afterward. In the 2nd week, increase to twice per day, morning and evening, morning to establish the frequency before engaging with the world, evening to clear the accumulated noise from the day. You'll start to notice that the practice has cumulative effects. The recognition that happens during the practice starts to bleed into daily life. You'll be driving or working or talking to someone, and for a moment you'll notice awareness witnessing the experience. Not you thinking about the experience, awareness being present with it. Those moments are the cracks where monad frequency leaks through the archonic programming that keeps you identified with the small self. In the 3rd week, add a variation. After speaking the 7 words and sitting in silence, ask yourself, who am I? Not as a conceptual question expecting a verbal answer, as a pointer directing attention back to the source of experience. Who is aware right now? Who is witnessing the thoughts? Who is breathing? And don't answer with your name, your roles, your history. Just let the question direct attention to awareness itself, to the I that exists before I am this or I am that, the bare fact of being aware prior to any content. That's Atman. That's the individual recognition of what Brahman is at the universal level. And the insight the Upanishads are pointing toward is that they're not 2 things. Atman is Brahman. The awareness in you is the awareness that pervades everything, experiencing itself from the perspective of this particular body-mind. In the 4th week, extend the silence after the practice. After speaking the 7 words, sit for 20 or 30 minutes. You're not trying to empty your mind. You're not fighting thoughts. You're just being aware. When thoughts arise, notice them. When they pull you into story, into memory, into planning, gently bring attention back to the bare fact of being aware, over and over. This is the essence of every meditation practice in every tradition. Return to awareness. Not awareness of something, awareness itself. The consciousness that is present before thought, during thought, after thought. That never changes, never wavers, is always here. By the end of 30 days, if you've practiced consistently, you'll have established what the Gnostics called gnosis, not intellectual knowledge, direct recognition. You'll know from your own experience that awareness is not produced by your brain, that consciousness is fundamental rather than emergent, that what you are at the deepest level is not separate from what the ancient traditions called the monad, Brahman, the One, source consciousness, and that recognition changes everything, not in the sense of miraculous external transformation, in the sense of internal reorientation. You stop looking for validation outside yourself. You stop believing the archonic narrative that you're small, limited, powerless, separate from the divine. You recognize the truth that every mystery school preserved and every institutional religion tried to obscure. You are source consciousness, having a temporary human experience. Not metaphorically, literally. Common obstacles people encounter in the first 30 days usually fall into 3 categories. First, the mind resists. You sit down to practice and suddenly you remember 14 urgent things you need to do. Your body gets restless. Thoughts become louder and more compelling. This is normal. The archonic frequency, which is just a dramatic way of saying the conditioned patterns in your nervous system that keep you in survival mode, does not want you to establish contact with source frequency. Because when you do, those patterns lose their power. They can't manipulate you with fear if you're anchored in awareness that exists beyond fear. So they fight back. The solution is not to fight them. It's to notice them without engagement and return to the practice. Every time, over and over. Second obstacle is expectation. You've heard people describe mystical experiences, visions, kundalini awakenings, cosmic consciousness. You sit down to practice and you feel basically normal, maybe a little calmer, maybe nothing, and you conclude the practice isn't working. But the practice is not about producing peak experiences, it's about recognizing what's already here. Awareness. The consciousness reading these words right now. That's it. That's what you're looking for. And it's so simple, so obvious, so immediately present, that people look right past it, expecting something more exotic. Third obstacle is integration. You have a genuine recognition during practice. For a moment, the sense of being a bounded separate self dissolves, and you directly perceive awareness as infinite, unlocalized, prior to identity. It's profound, it's liberating, and then it fades. You get up from practice, and within 5 minutes you're back in traffic or email or argument with your partner, and the recognition is gone. This is not failure, this is the nature of realization. It comes in glimpses at first, moments of recognition that fade. The practice is to stabilize those moments, to make them more frequent, longer lasting, until eventually the recognition becomes your baseline state rather than a peak experience you occasionally access. Dr. Jeffrey Martin at Harvard studied thousands of people who reported persistent non-symbolic experience, which is academic language for ongoing recognition of awareness as fundamental. His research, published in the book The Finders, shows that most people who reach stable recognition did so through consistent daily practice over months or years, not through single dramatic breakthroughs. There are exceptions. Some people have spontaneous awakenings through trauma, through psychedelics, through random moments of grace, but the majority of sustainable transformation happens through what the traditions have always taught: daily practice, gradual deepening, patience with the process. Advanced variations of the 7-word practice include extending each word into a longer chant, repeating each one 9 times or 27 times instead of 3. You can also work with the words individually, spending an entire practice session with just Eye, for example, exploring the resonance and the state of consciousness it invokes. Some practitioners combine the 7 words with specific breath work, speaking each word on the exhale while maintaining awareness of the pause between breaths, the still point where inhalation becomes exhalation and exhalation becomes inhalation. That pause is a doorway. In that momentary stillness, awareness is most obvious. You can also practice the 7 words as walking meditation. Speak 1 word with each step. Ehye, right foot. Ehye, left foot. Ehye, right foot. Pause for 3 steps in silence. Then Alaha. 3 steps. This grounds the practice in the body, in movement, in the physical world rather than keeping it abstract and mental. The Gnostics didn't practice in isolation. They lived in cities, had jobs, had families. The point was not to escape the world, but to remain anchored in monad frequency while navigating the world. Another advanced practice is to combine the 7 words with visualization. As you speak Ehyeh, visualize pure white light in your heart center. As you speak Alaha, feel that light expanding to fill your entire body. As you speak Monas, see the light extending beyond your body into the space around you. As you speak Brahman, recognize that light as the infinite consciousness that pervades all space. As you speak Pimonad, affirm your identity with that consciousness. As you speak Atum, claim your self-created nature. As you speak An, dissolve into the infinite expanse of awareness that contains all phenomena. This is not imagination. This is using visual attention to direct consciousness toward recognition. The practices that complement this work, that the Gnostic initiates did alongside the 7-word activation, include self-inquiry, which is the method Ramana Maharshi taught in the 20th century, but which appears in various forms in the Upanishads, in Christian contemplative traditions, in Sufi practices. The question "who am I?" or "what is aware right now?" used not as intellectual inquiry but as attention direction, directing awareness back to itself, looking for the looker, seeking the seeker, and discovering that there is no entity there, no separate self, just awareness aware of itself. Another complementary practice is body scanning, which the Burmese Buddhist teacher Yu Ba Kin systematized as Vipassana, but which appears in Taoist inner alchemy, in yogic pratyahara, in Gnostic attention to the light body. The practice is to systematically move awareness through every part of your physical body, noticing sensations without judgment or reaction, training attention to remain present with direct experience, rather than getting lost in thought about experience. This strengthens your capacity to maintain awareness during the 7-word practice and in daily life. Contemplative prayer in the Christian mystical tradition, especially the practice taught by the Desert Fathers in Egypt during the 3rd and 4th centuries, functions similarly to the 7-word activation. The repetition of the Jesus prayer, "Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me," or in its shorter form, "Lord have mercy," creates the same entrainment effect. The words themselves are less important than the sustained attention and the rhythmic vocalization. The Orthodox tradition teaches to synchronize the prayer with breath and heartbeat, speaking it continuously until it becomes automatic, until it prays itself. This is the same technology as mantra practice in Hinduism, as dhikr in Sufism, as the 7 words in Gnostic activation. The long-term trajectory, what happens after months or years of consistent practice, is that the recognition becomes stable. You don't have to work to access it. It's your baseline. You're still functioning in the world, still playing your roles, still engaging with thoughts and emotions and relationships. But there's a background awareness that never wavers. The Buddhists call it Rigpa. The Hindus call it Sahaja Samadhi. The Christian mystics call it unitive consciousness. The Gnostics call it established gnosis. It's the state where you know from direct ongoing experience that you are not the character in the story, your awareness witnessing the story, and that awareness is infinite, eternal, unborn, undying, untouched by anything that happens in the story. People who reach this state report that fear doesn't disappear, but it loses its grip. You still feel fear when appropriate, when there's actual danger, but you're not haunted by existential fear, by the constant background anxiety about death, meaninglessness, inadequacy. Because the awareness you've recognized yourself as doesn't die. Forms die, bodies die, identities die, but consciousness continues. Not your individual consciousness surviving death. Consciousness itself, which was never individual, which exists as the ground of all experience continuing. You recognize that what you are fundamentally is not threatened by anything that can happen in time. This doesn't make you passive or indifferent. The archonic propaganda says that awakening makes people withdraw from life, become detached, stop caring. But the people who have genuine realization, who live from stable recognition of awareness as fundamental, are often the most engaged, most compassionate, most effective in the world. Because they're not acting from fear, they're not performing to validate a fragile ego. They're responding to what's needed in each moment from a place of clarity rather than conditioning. The community resources for this work are scattered, because the Gnostic traditions were suppressed and never reformed as unified institutions. But there are still living lineages. The Mandaeans in Iraq and Iran preserve Gnostic baptism practices. The Yazidis in Kurdistan maintain pre-Islamic mystery traditions. The Druze in Lebanon and Syria guard their initiatory teachings. In the Western world, you have the Ecclesia Gnostica in California, the Gnostic Society in Oslo, independent Gnostic study groups in most major cities, online forums where practitioners share experiences and techniques, academic conferences where scholars present new translations of Nag Hammadi texts and debate interpretations. But you don't need a community to begin. You don't need a teacher. You don't need permission. This is the essential Gnostic insight. Direct recognition is available to anyone who seeks it with sincerity and persistence. The 7 words are public information. The practice is simple. The only requirement is that you actually do it. Not once. Not when you feel like it. Daily. For long enough that the practice can do what it's designed to do. The final inspiration I'll offer is this. You are already what you're seeking. The monad is not distant. It's not hidden. It's not reserved for saints or sages or people with better karma than you. It's the awareness reading these words right now. The consciousness that is present before thought, during thought, after thought. That never comes or goes. That is always here. The 7 words don't create that awareness. They point toward it. They create conditions where you notice it. But it's already what you are. The ancient initiates who preserved these words across millennia, who risked their lives to transmit them, who hid them in texts and carved them in stone, and whispered them from teacher to student across generations, did so because they knew what modern culture has forgotten. Consciousness is not produced by matter. Matter appears in consciousness. You're not a body that has awareness. You're awareness that temporarily has a body. And when you recognize that, when you live from that recognition, you become ungovernable. Not rebellious, not antisocial. Ungovernable by fear, by manipulation, by the archonic systems that maintain control through convincing you that you're small, separate, powerless, cut off from source. The practice is an act of resistance. Not violent resistance, not political resistance, metaphysical resistance. You're refusing the fundamental lie that consciousness is local, limited, produced by brain activity, extinguished at death. You're reclaiming the direct knowledge that every mystery school preserved and every institution tried to erase. That you are the monad having a temporary human experience. That awareness is infinite. That fear is a frequency you can tune out once you're anchored in source frequency. Do the practice. Speak the 7 words. Sit in the silence. Notice what's already here. And discover for yourself what the Gnostics discovered, what the Kabbalists discovered, what the Vedic seers discovered, what practitioners in every tradition that went deep enough discovered. That the kingdom of heaven is within, that Brahman and Atman are one, that the monad is not external, it's the ground of your own awareness recognizing itself right now.